Hi, Simon.
Hey Lisa, how are you?
Good. How's it going? You
Good.
have a good
I,
weekend?
I did. I was in LA for the horror nights at Universal Studios. It was really, really fun this year.
Wait,
So,
uh, horror nights?
horror,
Okay.
horror. And they have mazes. That's the big difference. You know, it's in the park, but in the Universal Studios Hollywood Park, but it's there's 9 different mazes, including they take the studio tram tour, if you've ever been on that, and they turn it into like crazy,
They jump
like,
out at you and stuff.
yeah, they get you down to the bottom of this hill, and then you go through this whole like different like scenarios. Like, I don't. Did you ever see the movie Megan, about the sort of
No, but I
android
know. Yes,
girl
I know
that
what it
goes
is.
insane or whatever? Um, they have her in there in these sets, and she's chasing after you and has a chainsaw, and I mean it's very fun.
No.
It's kind of crazy. And then the different mazes, they had one the weekend, the artist
Oh,
did a maze this year, and it was like called the Triple Nightmare, and it was like different scenes, and he was in it as like a kid and as an old person. At the beginning he's dancing, it's like an actor, right, dressed up as him, kind of
I see.
a little gruesome. And they're playing the weekend songs, and everyone in the line is, dancing, and it was totally fun. That was one of the best mazes, just because there's a lot of scares, like things pop out at you and people arms. They're not allowed to touch you, but the whole night is like from 7 till like 1 in the morning, and you're going through mazes, and you can ride rides too, but we only rode like 2 rides, like Jurassic Park and the Mummy, I think. But no, it's a really fun
That's
weekend.
fun. That's
Yeah,
fun. You're
it's
reminding
a
me. I I did like a VR thing where you're sitting in a chair, they put these goggles on you, and I guess you probably have some sort of headphones on or something.
mhm.
And it was maybe like 5 or 10 minutes, and you could pick different ones. And I did this one that you were going through. It was like a scary one, and you're going through, and there's like skeletons jumping out at you, and the person who was running the thing every now and then would just like touch you, like touch your leg. Yeah, it was horrifying. Like, because it's like you're seeing all this stuff, and then you're feeling them touch you. Like, it's kind of crazy.
That, wow.
Yeah,
Okay, so they're not allowed to touch you, and you are not
yeah,
allowed to touch them. And but otherwise it was fun. So really
that's
fun
fun.
trip. And
Very cool.
how about you? What you do?
I don't know. Well, I've been playing video games lately. I've been playing. It's a very old game, Legends of Zelda: Breath of the Wild, which came out in 2017. It's a million years old, and I literally just finished it after I
Yeah,
don't
but
know
that's not that old as
250
the
hours.
original Zelda. You know
Sure,
what I mean, right?
right? Yeah, it
So
came out. They bundled it when the Switch came out, which was 2017. So it was
okay,
its like showcase. Look what the Switch can do. Yeah.
got it. I thought maybe you
Well,
were going to tell me you played Super Mario Brothers, on your NS64 or whatever. So
no.
that would be really
But
old.
Rob attempted to connect a projector with the Switch to project onto our house playing games. It did not pan out.
Oh, why? What
So
happened? Too
um,
bright? Not
it
bright
was too
enough?
light out. Too light
Oh,
out.
got
We had
it.
to wait till later. And even still, it was a very dramatic thing. But anyway, so today I think we're talking about what marketing essentials.
Yeah, we're just, I think, basic concepts that any small business owner should really understand about marketing. I mean, we sling a lot of lingo, right?
True. And I think one of the things I'm just going to say off out of the gate is that people will immediately jump to tactics, and we will talk about that. But it's you got to start with a strategy first, right?
Right. I mean, your strategy becomes your plan, right? And you
A
got to have
plan.
a plan.
Yep. That's
I
a
mean,
good way of
that
looking at it.
again, there's another lingo thing. I mean, when people talk about strategy, they're really just talking about understanding just some basic stuff and having a plan to execute on it.
Yep. Yeah, I do think that's a good point. But let's talk about what are some of the things that go into that plan. What are things that some small business owners or startups need to think about?
I mean, it's probably things that they've already thought about. It's understanding who they are, right? As far as a business, right? What makes them different than their competition? What is their brand? What are the characteristics that they want people to take away when they engage with them, when they have a business relationship with them, right? Are they supposed to be super serious like a law firm, or is it about fun, like some sort of school, or are they supposed to be, very practical or helpful, so there's all those different things that they need to understand about themselves so that they're able to present those in the marketing information sort of consistently.
Yep. And then I guess after knowing who you are, it's probably who are you selling to? What does your business offer? To whom are you offering something to?
To whom?
I don't
So I
know.
think what you're
Yeah.
saying is
Grammar, please.
audience, right? Who's your
Yes,
audience? So
exactly.
who's your daddy? Who's your audience? All right.
Yeah. And audience you can have multiple audiences. That's another thing that sometimes people, I've talked about this before, they think it's one thing in a very specific demographic. It's moms of kids between this age or something. And it doesn't have to be just that. It could be, let's say you sell to other businesses, but you also sell directly to a consumer. You might have different audiences and you're going to say different things to these different people. You're not going to have the same message.
Agreed. Also, I think you could have you sort of err on the side of, oh, I have this great product, everybody will want it, right? And your audience
True.
becomes the whole world, and there are very few products outside of maybe Coca-Cola that is actually applicable, right?
It's true. Yeah. And then I guess the last thing is that what do you want these people to do once you've identified who you are, who you're targeting, who your audience is? Then what do you want them to do? And it's usually buying a product or service, but sometimes it's even before that, you need them to do something else first, just so that you know that they are a good candidate, that they're qualified in some
Yeah, I
cases.
mean, to your, it could be that you want a lead, you want them to call you or email or respond to your website, right? Fill out a form to have a follow up. Um, that's that would be different steps that you want them to do, right? To
Mm-hmm.
ultimately become this sort of customer, and then you may want to have a plan to maintain that relationship, right? To have reoccurring conversions, if you will, or reoccurring activities, engagements with that customer.
Yep. So this plan then, it's kind of just you might do this once to identify who you are and who you're targeting and what you want them to do, but it doesn't mean that you don't revisit it because maybe you've grown and you're adding more products or services, or maybe just you've changed your tone. Maybe that's something that has evolved over time and you want to
Right.
change it. So, but generally speaking, it's not something that you do every time. Um, but
Every time, you mean every time you do a marketing sort of
yeah, yeah.
activity?
I don't even know what I mean by every time. It's
Well,
like you don't do it over and over again. It's like you it just
right.
kind of it's a little bit more lasting.
I'm building a website. I don't need to, like, some of the strategic pieces that are web specific you need to look at, but overall, again, your brand and your audience and your conversion, like, you wouldn't have to keep addressing that. But another reason you might want to address it if you have new competition, right? So
True.
if your competition, whoever's in your market space, um, says, you know, introduces something that really differentiates them that you need to either have some response to, or you need to show that you do that. You've been doing it
as
since
well.
1984, you know, or whatever. So,
Yeah, that's a good point because sometimes there's things where it's goes without saying. You're like, I've always been this way, and then but then somebody comes along and touts something. You're like, oh God, now I actually
well,
have to.
I remember, and I don't remember which version of Windows, but it was like Windows 2000 or something came out, and they were showing how they had, or maybe it was Windows like 97. Literally, I'm that old, and the Apple's campaign response was Mac 84, because they, you know, Windows, oh wow, you know, and it's like, well, wait a minute, Macintosh has been
We've been
doing
doing this
Windows and things like this 10
a
years or
lot
more
longer.
prior. Yeah.
Yep,
So I remember, you know, again, you have to understand what's happening in your space, kind of thing.
yep.
So then what? I mean, once you
I was
have a
gonna say, let's
plan,
get practical because
yeah.
then, right, and I think there's some methods to or steps to think about when how do you then go into the tactics. Um, but this is always I think there's a bridge between the strategy and the tactics because you still kind of have to have a plan or a strategy for your tactics as well.
Yeah.
And I don't know which way to go. Like maybe if we do you want to
Well,
go in kind of a linear fashion of what a
yeah, I think,
customer might go through or prospect might go through, or should we set things up of how a marketer or a small business owner or startup should set things up
I
first?
mean, I think you could look at it both ways. So you
Let's
can,
do the latter.
so to sort of define your stages, if you will, of your what we call a funnel, I think is what you're getting at, right?
Well,
So,
that's the former. So,
oh no, I
but
thought the
but
former
we
was a
could
journey, but okay.
similar. The latter would be you probably need to establish a website. You know, like that's a kind of a first step that somebody as a business owner might do because you need to have a place for people to go to before
It,
you start doing marketing.
yeah, I mean, I think there are businesses. There's probably people doing, you know, landscaping or gardening, or even maybe some, you know, other types of small services business that don't have a web presence. Uh,
Crafts.
yeah, but I think
Oh,
if,
no, that's not what you
well,
meant. So landscaping, but they might be on Yelp or something, though. I
sure, I
still
was
think
gonna,
there's an online presence.
right, and so there's definitely a digital presence. That's a
That's a
good
good way
point.
of putting. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
good way of putting it. All right,
But I think if
now,
you're going to do some of the digital tactics that we're going to talk about, right, you're going to need a place to send them. That's the purpose of a website. So it's branding, information, right, sometimes referred to as brochureware, but then it's also a destination for engagement or that connection with that customer, that digital connection, right?
yeah, for sure. And then we just touched on a couple things. So I mentioned Yelp. There's like Etsy. Like you don't have to have a website. You can use a platform that
Sure.
is made for. Maybe there's a platform that whatever your industry is in, you need to show up there so you can be found. But just some sort of place that you are in charge of what the content is. You can manage that, and you can measure it.
Yeah,
So
I
I'd say
think
that's kind
Yelp,
of a first
that's a
thing.
really good example of where it could serve both purposes, right? If you're very, very small, you could just make sure that you own your Yelp page, right? You're, as a
Yep.
business, you can claim your Yelp
Yep.
page, and then you make sure that the basic content, hours, phone numbers, description and everything are accurate photos. But if you have more, Yelp is a way to connect people to your website, right? Where you can get even more information. Maybe that's where you have a lead form, things like that. So that's a good example of a good starting point. Um,
Yep.
I think small businesses should absolutely all be in Yelp, and other services like that. Google has something similar for businesses
Google My
through.
Business.
Yeah,
Yep.
exactly.
Yeah, and that's free. I think both are
They're
free.
both
You
free.
just have
Yeah.
to, yeah, unless you want to sponsor or something.
Right.
Okay, so let's say somebody's established their presence in some way. They have and maybe it's Instagram. That's another good example. Some people are selling things solely on Instagram, and that's fine. But you got to find people to sell to. And that might be generating leads. Your demand generation is another term that is used for this. And there's a
Right.
ton of different things that we can do to generate those leads and driving them to your website, your store, your whatever, your property that you own.
Right.
So should we talk about some of those
I mean,
paid and organic versions?
yeah,
Let's kind of
exactly.
touch on
So,
both.
um, having some sort of digital destination, if you will. And I used to joke around and say, even a black hole is a destination. So, not one that you necessarily want to go to, but
No.
if you have information on a web page, Google's going to index it, right? Google is 90+% of all web searches. So if somebody says, they're looking for a hairdresser, they're looking for a gymnastics school, they're looking for some sort of service like a lawyer or whatever, state services, you Google those things and people pop up, right? Content websites pop up, and it could be Yelp, but more likely it's probably a regular sort of owned website. And that's one way. That's a free way, like to get people interested in your product, like is to show up on that first page of the web search.
Yep.
But then there's paid, right? Why don't you talk a little bit about like paid search versus say the other types of paid to play marketing?
Well, I was just thinking, no.
Well,
I was just thinking, no. I was just thinking because you were kind of talking about free ways, but there's also social media is a free way as well, but
sure.
it's a lot of work. So I just wanted to mention that
Oh,
first before
sure.
moving on to the paid, because you can,
Okay.
I feel like anybody can, and it's not a bad idea, is to establish a social presence, Facebook, Instagram, now TikTok, YouTube, even if it's appropriate. It depends on your business, but those types of things, it's starts out as it's free, and then you may want to delve into paid because it's pretty slow to try to get people, like you beg your friends to follow a page or something,
That's
and
true.
then it doesn't it's like not enough. Okay, so then on the paid side, again, social media, you can put ads that you define. This is who I'm targeting. This is the audience that I'm trying to reach. You define how much money you want to spend. They make recommendations, always more than you probably want to.
Sure.
And then you provide the images, headlines, descriptions, whatever. Or you can just say, pull information from my website and it'll generate it for you. I don't recommend that. It's not a bad place to start, but I think it's better if you upload a bunch of images, as many as possible, upload a bunch of headlines, as many as possible. So you can do that for social media. You can also do that for within Google. You can sign up for a Google Ads account. They often have promotions where maybe if you spend $100, they give you $100. So it's like a way to get your foot in the door. You're like, okay, this is, a free, I'm getting $100 of
Well,
value. Yeah.
yeah, and that you
What?
could burn through $100 at Google. I was
Oh
going to
yeah.
say in like a day
Very
or
easily.
less.
Very easily.
So
Um,
one thing though, just to touch on, so social, there's sort of that two pieces, right? There's the free and there's the paid. Go ahead and hack away.
Go ahead.
Um, the you need to think about a content. What's your storytelling, right? That you need to have content in addition to sort of just promotion, if you will, right? Like,
Yes. It is true. And that's almost like as an aside. So if you want to get into spending money on advertising, which is a good idea to do, you don't want to be just lighting money on fire. If you have a plan of who am I targeting? What are the problems that my product or service is solving for?
right.
That's your good thing. There's lots of like categories or types of ads you can create. And if even if there's ads that you see that you like, maybe you try to dissect what is it about this ad that I like. It depends on where somebody, a prospect, somebody's not a customer yet. So it depends on where they are in the process of considering buying something
Hmm.
from you or a competitor.
Right.
So um, let's actually sidebar. What if we just talk about the concept of the marketing funnel or customer journey, what those stages are, and then I'll circle back to why content might be different on those different
Sure.
stages. Just
So I mean, at a very high level, right? If you think about a funnel being wider at the top and narrow at the bottom, there's a layer at the top, and it's typically referred to as awareness, right? And that's where most people enter your funnel, is they become aware of a service or a product or your company brand or company name, and they start into the funnel, and they come through awareness type of communications and messages and advertising. Then there's sort of that next big level, which is really convert or consideration. Sorry, not conversion. And that's where I think there's always an art and a science combination, because different people will do different things. They don't follow a linear path inside of that consideration when they're like looking at a product description or using a compare tool or going to a third party website where someone has rated or provided, a recommendation or a review of a product, or even your own reviews, right, that you might capture at some point. So people may bounce around in there, and that's sort of what we try to symbolize a little bit with our it's mostly marketing logo, right? It's a little bit of a vortex, right? As far as people going into that consideration sort of process. And that's where it gets tricky. And that's where things like, and we'll talk in future episodes about measurement, why measurement's important, and why, doing different techniques or different tactics that sort of work together that pull people through that consideration phase. So they're not just sort of spinning around. And then the bottom of that funnel is what we consider conversion, right? It could be a purchase, but it might be generating a lead, right? And then a lot of people will think about the funnel then widening again, and there's a point after that, conversion point, and that's really this sort of engagement and future sort of cycling where, okay, they exited the one funnel and now they're going to go out and come back, and they might start again, especially if you're a product or service where there's something that happens on a monthly or weekly or whatever basis, right?
yeah, another model actually. So the way you described it, it's and the reason why we've had it as like a bigger at the top and narrower at the bottom is because people drop off. You don't
Right.
get 100% of the people that start becoming aware of your offer, whatever you offer, to considering it to purchasing.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't
You have
happen
leaks.
100% of the time.
Yeah, your funnel
But
always has leaks.
it does. And it's also just like, oh, this is not relevant to me. Like sometimes
Sure.
somebody's aware of something and they're like, I don't want, or it's
or
now's
or
not the
they're
right
not
time,
ready,
or
like you
yeah, they
said.
might not be ready. Yeah. So people drop off all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Another term I've heard is a flywheel. So more instead of you were saying like they go in and then they come out and they start all over again.
Mm-hmm.
Flywheel is this notion that they become aware of it, they start to consider it, they actually purchase it, and then they become almost like an advocate. And then
Right.
that advocate then gets somebody else to then become aware, consider, convert, and it goes around and around and around. So it's kind of another visual
Yeah,
representation of
absolutely.
the same kind of concept. Um,
So now what? So now we understand our sort of basic levels of our funnel, and inside of awareness or consideration, you might have further, breakout of pieces depending on your business. But at a very simple level, I think that what would you do next?
well, before doing that, A moment ago, I wanted to do a sidebar to talk about,
Yeah.
so I got to get back into my prior sidebar, which is talking about that you might have actually different messages to depending on where somebody is, and you also might use different marketing tactics or marketing channels. Channel meaning like email, display advertising, search advertising. Um, on the awareness side, again, think of this as like a billboard on a freeway. Not that I recommend people doing billboards on freeways because you can't really measure them, but that's like I'm putting this loud thing out there for anybody driving by to
Mass.
see.
Yeah.
Yeah, mass, exactly. So very broad. Social media is often very good for that because it can cast a very wide net because there's so many users that are known on Google, Facebook,
Right.
Instagram, for example. Um, and it might just be, again, it might be more brand oriented. So you're like, we do this, and it's just very high level messaging. On the consideration side, so again, it depends on what your product or service is that you're offering. You alluded to some of these, Simon, where it's, is it, I'm thinking about this and I want to compare it to other things. Do you have a calculator if that's appropriate?
Hmm.
Is it a test driving a car? That could be something that, or is it building your own, you can configure the colors and you're, configuring the car of your dreams. And so by having that tool, it kind of gets people a little bit closer. They're
Right.
considering it. Is it objection handling? So sometimes people like FAQs or what is normally a support type of information is sometimes helpful. Like, what are the specs of something if you're offering some, hardware or something like that, that it's, I want to know if it's compatible. So it's those kinds of questions that are nitty gritty. And then the final thing being on the conversion side, it's what is it going to get them? Like, what is that final thing? Is it a discount? Is it a customer testimonial? Sometimes that is what pushes people over the edge.
Right.
And or it's a great review, and it is, again, it's going to depend on your business. Now, then to answer your question is like, then what next? Then you have a customer now. Great. Hopefully what you offer is something that they can buy again, or maybe they tell somebody else about it. But the idea of, the word is nurture. You want to nurture this customer. Or maybe your business is, I got their email address because I offered them something, but I haven't gotten them yet. So if you have a very expensive offering, people are probably not going to be buying on a whim. You need to continuously message them in ways that
Right.
it would nurture them into becoming a customer or being retained as a customer. And email is a great way to do that. I don't know if you have other text messaging now too.
Yeah. No,
Do
I
you
was
have any
just
thoughts?
thinking that nurturing for a new customer is typically referred to as onboarding, right? Where
Yeah.
you introduce the customer to everything that they've just purchased, so that you remove any sort of probability of buyer's remorse or returns or whatever.
Yeah.
But then you're right. There's nurturing when they're sort of not completely in or through the consideration funnel, and you need to prompt them with new features or benefits, or, that, like you said, overcoming pain points or objections. Like, this might cost a lot, but it's worth it, and this is why, or, different things like that. So,
Mm-hmm. And then, as always, everything you do should be measured. And so, where
yeah.
I mentioned the billboard thing, it's like I don't tend to recommend it because it's really not that sophisticated in terms of measurement. I think you can say, oh, these are people that are commuting from here to here and they're mostly in tech or whatever the case is. It's like, I don't know that you really know that. So until things get a little bit more sophisticated, it's like, unless your CEO wants to see his company,
Picture.
yeah, which is a thing. It's very
Well,
common,
I mean, the
but
other thing you do
it's not a good
is,
use of money.
here's an interesting maybe not a small business, but if you think about driving down the freeway, to your example, and there's a rest stop ahead and there's a Carl's Jr. and a Jack in the Box, if Jack in the Box can buy the billboard that's half a mile up the road and says, come in and get a, Happy Jack or whatever the heck they're called. um,
Yeah.
then that's they're taking something that would be typically very broad and like not targeted, but they know that people are hungry and they have a choice between Carl's Jr. and Jack in the Box, and you've just thrown this beautiful picture of a beautiful hamburger and two tacos in front of them, and I bet that helps drive traffic into the store for sure.
You know what? That's a good example of you can measure things almost like before and after. So let's say using that
Mm,
example, and you don't have a billboard there, and then you do have a billboard there, and did you see increases in
yeah,
stops?
I
So
mean,
it's not
and
totally
it
scientific, but
sure, and it's called pre and post, right? And we use it even on web pages and things like that, where you're not having a way to actually test something.
mhm.
Testing is another piece of measurement, right? Testing different ideas in social media. The social platforms have great tools to allow you to sort of test and figure out which of your advertisements or promotions or whatever are driving more traffic and more qualified traffic. So you can really get a pretty good picture, especially digital, in what's happening with your customers. So I think that's probably you know where you need to be thinking.
Yep, agreed. So that concludes this episode. Where can people find us?
Well, it's mostlymarketing.com
Yep.
and
.com.
and
Yeah, and if you have questions for us, there's Ask the Hosts. We have a link on our website. You can ask us questions that we will answer, try to answer on the podcast. And I think that's it.
that's
That's a
it.
wrap.
Have a great day.
Apparently, we need to wait for the upload to finish, which I don't